Hello, today we're going to talk about growing flowers for drying in Kentucky. First off, why dry? Even with the increased popularity of plastic and fiber flowers or silk, for example, many people still prefer the real thing preserved in a lifelike manner. Also, it's better for the environment. Store-bought dried flowers are expensive as well for the real thing, so it's easier and much more cost-effective to dry your own. It's also fun. Flower preservation has become a popular hobby as well. Flowers such as marigolds, zinnias, goldenrod, yarrow, roses, and hydrangeas are readily available, and the cost of additional materials needed are relatively inexpensive when compared to that of other hobbies. Many people like to preserve the flowers from sentimental events such as weddings, funerals, and ceremonies and such as well, just as a keepsake. Things that have been used to dry flowers. There's lots of things out there and ways to dry flowers. Most of us are familiar with probably one or two ways, but many materials have been used to preserve flowers, some more successfully than others, depending on what types of flowers they were. These include sawdust, washing powder, talcum powder, alcohol, cornstarch, silica gel, cornmeal, yes, I said cornmeal, borax, sand, antifreeze, and even kitty litter. No one material can be considered the best because that they may be prove best for one flower, but may be inferior material for another flower, or it may work for one person because of their technique and not work for someone else. Does take some skill. There's a certain amount of expertise involved in drying flowers. People may become skilled using a certain technique, while others may get poor results using the same method with the same flower species. So it's kind of trial and error on which method is going to be best for you. All the methods are slow except for microwave drying. Yes, that is a thing. Microwave drying, we'll talk about it in a few. It's one of the easier ways to dry flowers, believe it or not. First off, we have pressing. It's one of the easiest ways of drying flowers. The plant material is placed between the pages of a book, which is closed and weighted. Uh, Special devices are also used now. They're called um, plant presses, as you can see in the picture there. Basically, it's just multiple layers of cardboard with you put the plant part or flower between the pieces of cardboard, and then you pull the straps there and bound it tight, and you let it sit. Um, Violets, pansies, larkspur, and ferns are preserved well when pressed in this manner. They keep their shape, and you can still get a nice flower form out of it this way. Material preserved with this method can be arranged in displays and frames and such as you see in that picture there. They're also good glued to postcards and those kinds of things, or cards in general that you can give to people. Air drying is by far the easiest and probably the most used form of drying flowers. This exposes the flowers to warm, dry air in a dark place. This is the oldest and simplest method. It's commonly referred to as the hang and dry method. A method named somewhat misleading because some flowers are air dried on wire racks. Those would be peonies, for example, but that's still air drying, even though this technique that you see there with the hanging is probably the most popular and it's still the most commonly when used. It was the method used here in America by the English colonists. The majority of the flowers in the dried arrangements displayed at Williamsburg and Mount Vernon and other historic houses were preserved in this manner. This picture here, you can see there's air drying in an old barn or shed with a metal roof there, and you can see they're hung high up into the building there where it's hot next to the tin roof. That way they'll dry quicker. The plant material to be dried is just collected, tied, and simply hung upside down in a warm, dark, dry place, which you can see there's the barn. The darkness helps preserve the flower color. If you get too much light, the flower color will fade. Flowers dried in this manner should be cut just before being fully opened. You don't want to try to dry mature flowers on any of these things. You want them to be not quite to full beauty yet. Examples of flowers that preserve well by this method are baby's breath, cattail, statice, celosia, dock, goldenrod, heather, and pussy willow. We'll talk about a bunch more here a little later. Flowers dried in this manner are extremely stiff once dried. Blue and yellow flowers retain their colors when air dried, but pink flowers and red flowers tend to fade, and you'll see that whenever you start drying flowers. Roses and peonies shrink somewhat when air dried, more than a lot of other flowers, so keep that in mind. Now we'll move on to some other options for drying. We have desiccants, which basically is a substance that helps pull moisture out of the plant material so it'll dry. In this method, you're embedding the flowers in a granular desiccating material. It's probably the most commonly used method for people that are really into drying flowers. It's also considered the best all-around method to keep your blooms in the shapes that you might want or in a natural shape. Several materials can be used, and they vary in cost and results that they can produce. So it is important to use the correct procedure when covering the flowers so that their form will be maintained. You don't want to mash the flowers in this technique. So to cover the flower with the desiccants, you want to put about an inch of desiccated material at the bottom of the container. You want to cut the flower stems to about a half an inch and stick this into the center of the material at the bottom to hold the flower up. Next, you want to pour the desiccated material around the perimeter of the container away from the flower. Don't pour it directly on that, building up a continuous mound of about an inch. Then you want to tap lightly on the container and the material will move to the flower, not alternating the form of the petals. Basically, you're just moving that material in gradually around those petals to keep them in their form and their shape. Continuing adding the material, tapping on the container as you go until the flower is completely covered. Lastly, you want to add about an inch of the material on top of the flowers. So you don't mash the flower and you're keeping your flower or your bud, in that case, in the picture before, the rows upright and just gradually letting the desiccant move around those petals to keep their shapes. Some desiccants that you can use, there's borax methods. This one involves burying the flower in a mixture of borax and white cornmeal. It's a 2-to-1, or borax and sand, which is also 2-to-1. It's a two parts borax, 1 part cornmeal, or 2 parts borax and 1 part sand. These methods results in flowers that are less stiff than those with the hang and dry method, but the particles tend to cling to some of the flowers, so a little harder to get off the flower once you're wanting to display them. Also, in some cases, the sand, because of its rough edges, can produce little tiny holes in the petals, and you'll notice those after the flower is dried. These methods are trial and error, so because the flowers can be burned if embedded too long because of the chemicals there from the borax. About 10 days is an average if cornmeal is used, and about 16 days of drying is needed if sand is used. The cornmeal is probably better than the sand because it's not heavy and it's not gonna puncture holes in the flower petals as easily as sand would. Another desiccant is silica gel. Silica gel is actually granular. It's not a gel at all. It's more expensive than the other methods. It is good for quick drying flowers and for drying flowers with closely packed petals such as roses. If you're using silica, the container should be sealed tight for the best results. So you don't want any air escaping, which not really not escaping. You don't want moisture from the air to get to the silica because you want to keep everything in the container so it's drawing all the moisture out of those flowers. The flowers with this method will dry in about a week. The commercial material commercial material contains fine as well as coarse granulars, which in some cases produce very small punctures of the petals. It's not as noticeable as it might be with the sand, however. Silica gel may be oven dried after you've used it to dry your flowers. You can dry the gel back down at 300 degrees Fahrenheit in the oven for maybe 15 to 20 minutes, and then you can reuse the gel over and over. Another desiccant is oolitic sand. This is actually the best material available to get excellent results. So for the beginner, this may be worth you going and buying some of this. The sand is found naturally along the Great Salt Lake in Utah. It's heavy and puts steady pressure on the flowers while drying. It's smooth so it doesn't puncture the flowers. It's hollow so it absorbs more water, and it has a relative high pH, which helps preserve your flower color. So this is the all-around best chemical, I wouldn't say chemical, best desiccant to use for the beginner to get great results. Also, it's sand, so you can reuse it. Another one, believe it or not, is common sand. You want to clean your sand. If you want to buy builder sand, you got to clean your sand before you use it. Use it similar to oolitic sand, but builder sand or play sand should be washed first thoroughly. So you put the sand in a bucket of water with a couple of squirts of dish liquid. Stir it around, pour off the water, then continue adding fresh water, stirring it around and pouring off until the water remains clear. Then you want to dry the sand. If you want to do it for quick drying, you can put it in the oven at 250 degrees Fahrenheit on a cookie sheet, or you could just lay it out on a sheet outside in the sun and it will dry on its own. So we're going to treat the common sand to make it similar to oolitic sand. So once the sand is dry, it's cleaned and dried, you're going to weigh out 15 pounds of sand and place it in a medium hot oven on a cookie sheet until it's evenly heated throughout. Then you're going to remove the heated sand from the oven and stir into it about 3 tablespoons of melted paraffin wax. Use a large wooden spoon, something stiff so you can really stir it up. After it's cooled, add 1 tablespoon of bicarbonate of soda and 1 tablespoon of fine silica gel, and distributing these throughout. The wax smooths the sharp edges of the sand so it doesn't make holes in your petals, but it also reduces the absorbency, so that's why we're only using a small amount. The soda raises the pH, which preserves your color in your flowers, and the gel increases its absorbency. So then basically you're making common sand similar to the oolitic sand. Also, this can be reused. Another method, believe it or not, is water drying. This sounds crazy, but most of us have had some flowers in a vase and they actually dried on their own in the vase. So the way to do this is the stem of the flowers are initially placed in a couple inches of water uh, in the container, vase, whatever you're using, and then you're just going to allow the water to evaporate. The container and flowers should be in a dry, warm, and dark location. Dark is the key here to keep the color. The warm is going to evaporate the water quicker. Hydrangeas, yarrows, bells of Ireland, and celosia are some of the best ones to do this way. Now we're moving on to microwave drying, which, you know, the microwave's only been around, what, 40 or 50 years now. Flowers with thick petals, such as magnolia and hyacinth, do not dry well in a microwave, so keep that in mind to don't even try the thick-petaled flowers this way. You do want to select flowers just before they are fully opened. Fully opened flowers will often lose their petals after microwave drying. Foliage dries exceptionally well in the microwave as well if you're into drying, say, leaves and things to make prints or for leaf collections or any of those kinds of things. During drying, the flowers must be supported so that they dry in their normal form. If not, they will curl. Uh, so in the microwave, you're going to use the borax slash sand mixture or kitty litter if you're in a pinch. Silica gel is probably still the best for this method as well. You want to cover the flowers as you did earlier whenever doing the silica gel or the borax mixture, slowly filling it around the flowers and shaking your container until you slowly move that material in around those petals so you keep your shape. The best temperature to use on these, there's several different things or recommendations you'll see on the internet and some publications, but probably the most foolproof temperature and method is using the defrost method, which is only about 200 watts. So it heats a little bit slower, but it gets that temperature without burning inside of the gel if you get it too hot. It takes about 2.5 minutes to dry flowers and a half a pound of silica gel. But we'll keep that in mind, but there's a little better way if you're into really drying some really nice looking flowers. Most flowers need to be heated to about 160 degrees to dry successfully in a microwave. The best thing to do is buy a microwavable thermometer, which is basically a thermometer with not any metal, or one that has you can stick it in the gel and you run the little wire through to the outside so you can keep your temperature that way. Once the mixture reaches about 160 degrees, you can take it out of the oven and you can place a lid over the bowl slightly cracked, which is going to allow it extra if there's steam or something come out of there. Allow it to sit for 24 hours after that, and then you're going to carefully uncover your flower. You can see in this picture here, this is a rose that was covered in the borax mixture, and you can see what you get there. You will notice that you do have some indentions and things in those dried petals because of the weight of the desiccant that you were using. That's going to happen. If you use the silica gel, it's probably going to be less noticeable than using the borax and sand and those types of methods. Now we're going to move on to flowers for drying. Most flowers can be dried in some form or fashion. Most people don't really think of that, but most of them can be dried using a particular technique. Maybe a technique that's a little more time consuming, maybe a technique that's going to cost a little more up front to get the materials to do it, and it could be a technique that's going to take a little more time, a little more finesse. However, the following flowers are the easiest and most foolproof types that can be dried easily at home with simply air drying, which we described earlier, which was what the colonial our colonial ancestors did. They just hung their bundles and dried them. So these are the best flowers right now that we have out there. So you'll be successful with this method. So the flowers here, we have baby's breath. Most people are familiar with baby's breath. We have bells of Ireland there on the right. You can see those beautiful chartreuse green spears sticking up. Then we have Chinese lantern down on the bottom left, which you want to pick those to dry. As soon as they start to show some orange color is whenever you want to try to dry those. Then we have celosia or a coxcomb. That comes in several different types here. We've got the kind of thick round head that you see there, and then we have the plume types as well. All those dry quite well. Dusty Miller, if you want to dry some foliage, it's really easy. One thing about Dusty Miller, once it dries, it still has a little bit of give in the leaf. It's not like some of the other ones that are just kind of crispy and crunchy after they dry. We have Baptisia to the right, which are tall spikes there. That is also called false indigo. We also have Gomphrena down on the bottom left. If you've ever grown Gomphrena, those petals on those flowers are kind of stiff and pointy and almost feel dried even before you actually cut them to dry them. Then we have globe thistle to the right there. Don't worry, the globe thistle is not like the thistles that grow wild here. If you grow those, they don't get out of hand. These also you want to pick, well, all these you want to pick before they're completely mature, because a slightly less mature flower is going to dry better than a more mature flower will. Hydrangea. Hydrangeas, remember, it's a really good candidate for the water drying. It also dries really well with air drying. It may not keep its color quite so well, but you can always paint those as well to keep the color back to those. Straw flower on the right, that's another one of those that the petals feel kind of almost dry before you even cut them. That's one you definitely want to cut that when that flower is just starting to open, because it'll keep opening a little bit and it'll end up dried at the right stage for an arrangement. Millie cup stage at the bottom. This is a really nice blue in these little flowers, and they retain their blue color pretty nicely. That plant also is semi-perennial here. A lot of years it'll come back for you, several years actually nowadays with the climate in the state that it's in. And then on the right there is Nigella or Love in a Mist. That one also produces really nice seed pods that are really nice dried as well. Scabiosa or pincushion flower there, you can see on top left. That comes in a multiple of colors as well. You don't have to just pick those blues. Over to the right, there's roses. Most of us are familiar with drying roses. Roses can dry several different methods, including the hanging method. They may not keep their color quite as well that way. One thing about roses, again, with the other flowers, is you want to pick that flower in that bud form as you see there to dry. Then we have sedum down at the bottom left. A lot of times sedum almost seems to dry on the plant. That's another good one that holds its color quite well. It takes a little longer to dry because it is a succulent and has a lot of water in those leaves and stems that has to evaporate out. On the bottom right there is statice. That is a very common dried flower, and it retains its color probably better than any flower we can dry, even probably better than the celosia. Comes in a multitude of colors, as you can see there, and it's another one of those that whenever you touch those petals, they almost feel dried even before they're cut to be dried. Threw this one in, the unicorn plant. It's more grown for those huge seed pods, but they do need to be dried out there. You can see that you'll see those in sometimes in wreaths and those kinds of things. Next over, we have the winged everlasting or Amoebian. You can see that looks like a little daisy. Then we have the Xeranthemum there at the bottom left. That comes in multiple colors. And then over to the right, we have Yarrow, which is also a perennial, which is a quite prolific growing perennial that will bloom multiple times if cut back, but it dries quite nicely. It comes in a multitude of colors as well. So for those that signed up for the class, you're going to get some seeds of the next group of plants. The first one is Orlea or white finch. It has a nice, well-branched plant, 2.5 to 3 inch. You can see those flowers heads on there, nice little flowers in there. It's also known as white lace flower or Minoan lace. It's a very similar look to Queen Anne's lace, but a little bigger petals on it. It grows about 24 to 30 inches tall. Next we have Matricaria or Magic Single. Magic Single is the variety, I'm sorry. Upright, well-branched plants have long stems that support 1.5 to 1 inch little flowers on it. This is a tender, short-lived perennial, and you may know this plant by feverfew, which is a little more common name for this that most of us are probably familiar with these. This plant holds its color quite well once it's dried too. Then we have Amaranthus red spike. Amaranthus is a beautiful plant. There's a bunch of these different ones on the market. There's lots of different colors of these. I love this one because it has the darkest color of bloom and the darkest color of leaves. You can compare it to Popio red. It's a darker red than any of the rest of these plants. Really nice. When the plants are young and leaves are tender, the foliage makes a nice edible green, which, I mean, whenever this plant's just coming up, most of us are probably not going to eat these, but this is an amaranth, and you know, the amaranthus, there's seeds that people have eaten on those from South America for years, or for thousands of years. It was a grain crop down there. But this is a very beautiful plant, grows about 48 to 60 inches tall, dries quite well. This will also seed in your yard for you and come back. Then we have straw flower. This is Sultan mix. This is what I talked about earlier, in that the petals feel like straw already whenever they're actually growing. But you do want to pick them at this stage that you see here, but the middle is still closed up to dry. You can use these fresh or for cut flowers. They last quite a long time as a cut flower as well. But a dried flower, you know, they last for from now on. 2 to 2.5 inch flowers on these. These grow about 3 feet tall. Status, I talked about status earlier too, but this particular variety is Secret Pastel Blue, and you can see a nice pastel color there. These are already dried in this picture, so you can see how well it holds its color. It is an annual. It goes about 2 feet to 30 inches tall. And if you ever never grown status for it, it's kind of similar in look, leaf-wise, and in the way it grows. It's kind of similar to the rosette of a dandelion, and then it sends up these bloom spikes, which you can see there. They can get 24 to 30 inches tall, and you can cut those and dry them. Another one is not really grown for flowers, but it's a nice all-around dried flower. This is Artemisia Sweet Annie. It has a nice fragrance to the leaves, even when it's green or when it's dried. It's really nice. It's a tall plant. It does have a fern-like dark green foliage. This is already dried here in this picture. And you can use this foliage in wreaths or mixed bouquets. Another names for it is sweet wormwood or Chinese wormwood. Grows about 48 to 72 inches tall. And if you let it seed, it'll give you a few seedlings back the following year so you can have some more of it. Celosia Chief Mix. This is one of the better mixes of Celosia, and you can see you get a multiple of colors with this one. You're going to get gold, rose, persimmon, and then all the red shades mixed in there. It's also known as the crested coxcomb. I said earlier the rounded head, but it is called the crested coxcomb. It's also available in individual colors. If you want a particular color, you can always order those, but this is what you're getting is the mix. You can save seeds from these and plant them back. You don't always get the exact same thing back because most of these are hybrids, but you still will get something nice back. This grows about 36 to 40 inches tall. And then we have Gomphrena, QIS orange. This is a Gomphrena, as I said earlier. It almost looks like little clover blooms, but in different colors. But it is, like I said earlier, it feels almost dried already to the touch whenever you touch the petals. This is a really good cut flower, also really good for dried flowers. This one gets about 18 to 20 inches tall. This one is not necessarily the bloom that we're looking at, but it's really a neat plant, is the reason I put it in here. This is Eclepsias Oscar. This is a milkweed. It's a sturdy, branching bamboo-like foliage, different than any of the other milkweeds. It does have white flowers with lavender-colored centers, but that's not why we're growing. We're growing these for these nice papery seed pods here. Another name for these is called hairy balls, and they dry quite well, but they're very interesting looking and mixed in with an arrangement. This can be a perennial in zones 9 to 11, not for us, but you can save seeds on this. It's also called swan plant or swan milkweed. Then we have yarrow. This is Colorado mix. As I told you earlier, you can get a multitude of colors, and you can see the colors there in this mix. Quite nice. These 2 to 4 inch flat top flower heads, you can get all these shades of reds and pinks and rust in this. They get about 24 inches tall. This one is a very low maintenance perennial, so once you get it started, It's very tough, very easy to maintain. If it's in a really good location, it can spread quite a lot, so you may want to dig some off and give to some friends or some neighbors. It is attractive to beneficial insects as well. So you can get cut flowers out of this. It's a perennial, and you get to dry flowers off this. It's an all-around great plant for any of your gardens. It gets about 28 to 30 inches tall. Well, that brings us to the end of the cut flowers for drying or drying cut flowers. But if you want to try any of those techniques, try with some things with maybe some sand or the borax and cornmeal, something easy and cheap to start with, and see how well you do. Maybe trying in a microwave. It's a quick way to dry. I have dried a few things in a microwave. It works quite nicely. I still prefer the air drying method just because it's easy to cut them, hang them up, and wait for them to dry. This bouquet here you can see is some celosia that is dried. This would have been a dark pink or red when it was hung to dry, and you kind of get that more of a purpley color back out of that because it does fade. If anybody has any questions on growing or drying flowers, just give me a call here at the office at 859-336-7741. Happy gardening.